I will get started then. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jordan Graham. I'm a senior developer with Atten Design Group. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm here today to talk to you about Cypress testing for Drupal. I'll show you in advance a little bit about what we're going to be covering. I'll start with just a basic introduction to Cypress itself. I'll talk a little about getting it installed and configured both globally in your machine and within a project. And then I've got a case study to present, which is an Ajax-enabled form that I think demonstrates a lot of what I like about Cypress. I'll talk a little about fixtures, what they are and how to use them. And we'll get into some custom commands, which is super powerful for testing in Drupal. And then I've got another case study that I'll show you. I should also say that as luck would have it today, there's a part of my presentation that's not working. So I'm not going to be able to show you some things that I had wanted to show you, and we'll get to that when we get there. So I'll start with what is Cypress testing. So Cypress is a tool that'll test anything that runs in a web browser. It is open source software for those of us who are open source fans like I am, and it's completely web platform agnostic, which is to say it doesn't matter if your front end is coming from a Drupal theme or through a JavaScript-based app like React or Angular. Anything that runs in a browser, Cypress can test. Testing is important for a bunch of reasons, not least being it verifies that the features you're trying to build and deliver for your clients actually do what they're supposed to do. Testing protects against regression, which is to say that when you build something new, you want to make sure that everything that you built in the past still functions the way it's expected to function. And especially with complicated, complex projects, you might not remember all of the different functionalities that you have built in the past, and you want to make sure that they continue to function. And lastly, thinking through your testing helps you write better code. And it can save client budget. I have a colleague who writes his tests first and then develops his code. And a great example of how that can be super time saving is if you're developing a feature that requires a user to fill out a form, as you're building that functionality for your client, you're going to fill that form out in some cases many dozens of times. If you've written a Cypress test, it'll fill out the form for you because Cypress allows you to recreate the actual user experience. And so when it's time to test whether or not, like I just wrote some new code for this functionality, let's have a user fill out the form and see what happens. I don't, as a developer, I don't have to type all the user information in time after time after time. So that's a super example of how testing can save your clients money. I'll talk about a couple of use cases that I've seen personally in working with Drupal. And the first is there's a client of Atten Design Group that has a website that is a registered medical device. And so the idea there is that a medical practitioner can take a data file that's generated from their technology and upload the data file into this website. And then the website will analyze the medical data and say, this person should take cholesterol medicine or whatever the thing is. It'll give medical advice. And so it's really important that the client knows that the website is making correct diagnoses. So that's a great use case. And as we developed that site, testing was was absolutely a critical component to it. And I've got some quotes here from Richland Library. So Richland Library is in South Carolina, and we've done a lot of work with them building an open source library management tool called Intercept. But Richland Library will run extensive Cypress tests before all of their regular code deployments, and it's saved them a bunch of times. In some cases, they've delayed deployments until problems that have been identified through testing have been resolved. And other times they'll deploy and make a quick hotfix thereafter. But as Mark Gerald says here in the quote, it's definitely preferable to discover errors this way as opposed to having site users or customers talk about it. And this here on the right of the screen, I was thrilled to see one of my favorites, George Clinton, featured in a recent event at one of the Richland Library branches. So anyway, I had to include that. I want to speak to why Cypress testing is good for my Drupal career. I'll start by saying it can test anything I need to do in Drupal. So it doesn't matter what, as I said earlier, what the front end solution is. It's end-to-end testing. I can do integration tests. As when I began with testing for Drupal, I learned that front-end technologies can be much more tricky for testing. It's a more difficult setup. So in other words, if there's a React app that's part of your project, your PHP and PHP unit tests are one thing, but it's hard to test the full solution. Cypress can test anything that runs in the browser. So it just takes a whole category of complexity out of my life. And I appreciate that as a Drupal developer. As I said, it's agnostic as to the front end framework, and it's an increasingly popular tool. In 2019, it was recognized as being the number one tool to adopt by Technology Radar. They watch web development technologies and they look at the communities that are growing up around them, and they saw that Cypress was an increasingly powerful community of people using it. And since 2019, which is when they were given that rating, their adoption rate has only continued to increase. So there's more and more people, professionals using this. What that means to me as a developer is that if I invest time and energy learning how to do testing with Cypress, I'm not painting myself into a corner. I'm going to have the ability to use this for some time in the future. And lastly, and this is a personal aspect, I really love how intuitive Cypress's language is, and it's really easily extended and powerfully extended, and we'll get into that in just a moment. So next, let's talk a little bit about installing and configuring Cypress. Let's see, I'll start by saying we're talking about Cypress testing for Drupal, and I'm going to assume that you know how to install Drupal. It is out of scope for what I'm talking about today, but needless to say, if you're doing Cypress testing for Drupal, you have to have Drupal running on the server in which you want to do your testing. In my case, it's on my MacBook Pro. And so I'm just going to wave my hands at that and move on. Cypress is installed as you would install other JavaScript applications, depending on your operating system. It might be NPM, it might be Yarn. In the bottom here, and by the way, the install page at cypress.io is easy to follow and has lots of great information. If you're in a pure Linux environment, you want to make sure that you install the dependencies. It was really easy on my MacBook. Now, once you have installed Cypress globally on your server, on your local machine, we want to add it to a project. So for that, you go into your project directory and you create a package.json file. Let me find mine for you. Here is a real plain vanilla package.json file, and that's the big the big piece right there, it declares Cypress as a dev dependency, and that way you have that in your project. Once you have your package.json file, you install Cypress locally by running npm install. That process is going to install Cypress in your project into the project root in a directory called Cypress. I like to have my tests in a directory called tests, so I moved /Cypress into /tests/Cypress, and that has an impact that I'll share with you in just a second. There's a critical file called Cypress Config.js. This is sort of a main config file for your project's use of Cypress. You can declare your base URL. You tell Cypress where to find the things that it's going to need in order to do its job. And the reason I'm mentioning this right after talking about moving Cypress into my tests directory is that when you do that, you have to update your cypress.config.js, and you can see that I've got, I moved on, that I've indicated here, for example, that it's not, the plugin file is not in Cypress plugins, it's test Cypress plugins. So that's why I mentioned that, because of that custom location I like to put my tests in. This is the part that we're having trouble with today. So I'll talk about what it is, and I'll tell you how much I wish I could show it to you. The Cypress Test Runner is the app that you have installed on your globally on your machine, and it is an interactive app that allows you to watch the user experience in a browser on the right side, while it is showing you step by step the tests that you've written and the progress that you're making as you make your way through the tests. And let's see what's happening with my site. This is what's happening with my my test runner today, and it's never happened before. And this is what it's like when you go live to give presentations. So that's what I won't be able to show you, but I'll tell you all about why I like it so much. And I'll do the best that I can without being able to show it to you. So I'm going to talk about an Ajax-enabled form. And the reason that I chose an Ajax-enabled form as a case study today is that it is front-endy, right? Ajax, in case you don't know what that means, is it's an asynchronous sort of interacting with your server in a way that doesn't reload the page. And so it changes contents on the page without doing a page refresh. And this is exactly the kind of thing that would be tricky to test for with traditional PHP unit testing, which is why I love it for demonstrating Cypress. So with that, we're going to our video. So just a second while I conjure the video and share it through the browser here. It's going to give us a little bit of context. And okay, so now I stop this and now I share this. Here is our context for the case study. So that is our context for today. Let's see. And now I'd like to share my screen again.
Where's the button? The screen share button.
That's the one. That's not the one. The screen share button has disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay, I hope that you agree with me that it was worth that little detour, the Bridge of Death. So here's, let's go back to the Bridge of Death. Here's why I wanted to do that, is that the third question that are asked of the participants in that scene is not the same every time. The first two are the same. It's what is your name and what is your quest? And then the third question varies. And so what I did when I built this form is I said I made the third question dependent on the answer to the first question. So for example, if I say Sir Robin of Galahad, you'll notice as I tab, sorry, what's that?
Camelot.
Camelot, sorry, Camelot, very good. We have a scholar amongst us. When you notice when I tabbed out of that input field, it generated the third question. So poor Sir Robin of Camelot gets the question, what is the capital of Assyria? And in the movie, he's ill-equipped to answer that question. I'd love to show this to you in the test runner, but instead of that, I'm going to show you some really neat code. So here we are in my IDE. You remember that I like to have my tests in tests and Cypress, and integration is where I am keeping my tests. And so this is what some Cypress tests look like. Let me close this so people can see better. Make that a little bit bigger. So this is a Cypress test file, and we have blocks of test code that are wrapped in describe statements. And the way I like to think about a describe statement is it's super human readable. It says, this is what I'm about to do. Within the describe statement is an action. It's another human readable piece. It's the it statement. And to me, this says, this is the action I'm going to take to perform the test that I'm performing. So in this first test, we're going to test that whether or not we can successfully load the Bridge of Death page. So it finds the string Bridge of Death on the /bridge-death page. So this is what the test does. It does Cypress visit. So when in Cypress, a command is always preceded by CY, and that means it's a Cypress command. So there's a default Cypress command that says visit, and then you pass that the string of the URL that you'd like Cypress to visit. Remember, it has our base URL defined elsewhere. And then what you see on line 4 here, this is my assertion. My assertion is that the result of the previous, of line 3, of visiting the bridge-death page, the result contains the string Bridge of Death. So that's how I can test whether or not I was successfully loading the Bridge of Death page. So I'll get into another test right here, beginning on line 8. And this tests Sir Lancelot's experience. It does so by giving Sir Lancelot's actual answers. So since I can't run this in the test runner, I'll show you, obviously, what this is going to look like in production. So there's that. Oh, did you notice when I tapped out there that the Ajax refreshed and changed the favorite color? Interestingly enough, we have no reason to believe that the answer to question 2 is necessary. So to eat tacos would be my quest. And let's see, his favorite color, you can see. So let's walk through the test here. So the first thing we did is we visited the Bridge of Death page. Done. cy.get, that's the get command. And what it does is it goes in the DOM and it finds the element that you identified. So here I've identified something by ID. You can easily identify something by class. You can say, get me all the buttons. And then you can iterate through the buttons. So in this case, I'm getting a unique element. This is the input field for the name. And then you just type Sir Lancelot of Camelot. This is the intuitive language I was talking about. It's really easy for me to understand what's happening in this test. So it types to that, sort of Lancelot of Camelot to seek the Holy Grail. And then lastly, for question 3's input, it types blue. All right, and I will do that. And you'll see that the result includes the text right off you go. So again, after, oh, and this is one way of submitting a form right here, is you go find the submit input element, and you can tell Cypress to type curly brackets, enter. And my assertion in line 19 is that the result of all of the above contains the string right off you go. So in the Cypress test runner, on the right-hand side of your screen, which I wish I could show you, you would see exactly what we see here on this screen. And on the left, you would see that we have stepped through the test successfully, and there's a happy little green check mark that's provided. Let's see. There, and just for fun, the test experience is very similar for Sir Robin of Camelot to eat tacos. And what's that now? Sure, sure. Thank you. Fantastic. Voila. I don't know. And all right. And so Sir Robin, you can see that this generates an error. And in Sir Robin's test, the result of submitting that form, my assertion is that it contains the string, you don't know the capital of Syria, you're cast into the gorge of eternal peril, which that result does. Okay, so that's very basic Cypress testing, and it shows how easy it is to test something that's dependent on a front-end technology like Ajax. It was I'll talk a little bit now about fixtures, about what fixtures are and how you can use them.
Next question.
Yeah, go fire away.
You don't have to specify any waiting for the page to reload. Is that ever a problem?
No. And
Question for the recording?
okay, so the question is, do you have to specify any waiting period for the page to activate or reload in order to proceed with your Cypress testing? And Cypress handles that. And I'll show you in a, well, I can't show you. But for example, what I'll show you in a moment is how you can define drush as a Cypress command. And so, you know, drush ULI, sometimes when I type that into my command line, it takes a beat or two to get the result back. And when I'm using drush in all my Cypress testing, Cypress waits along with me. You know, in other words, it's the actual user experience. So no, we don't have to be cognizant of that because Cypress handles that. Thanks for that question. So fixtures. Fixtures provide an ability to load a set of data from a file. And there are a bunch of reasons that you might use fixtures. One being if you have multiple tests that need to use the same data. If you use one data source, you reduce the possibility for, you know, fat fingering, for making typos, for your test accuracy is going to be greater if you're always calling on the same data. It's really easy to iterate through data that's in a fixture. And for security reasons, you might want to keep some of this out of your repository. So in other words, you know, a moment ago when we were looking at our test here, you know, we've got King Arthur's actual answer to, you know, his questions, right? In other words, I'm sort of making a joke here, but you might have sensitive information that you need to use in your testing. So you can keep it out of your repository and just make sure that wherever you're testing, you know, that local machine has sensitive data, and that's a little bit better in terms of security. So let's continuing with our Bridge of Death scene. I want to introduce the concept of a fixture by just looking at our crew. So these characters in the front, this is our crew. And wherever my repository is, I'm going to go show you my fixture. So here I am again in test Cypress. I've got my fixtures in the fixtures directory. And here's my fixture. And I'll move this aside. So what you can see here, this is a JSON file. And each element of the JSON file, as you can see, has a name, a quest, and this is actually an answer to question 3, but I called it question 3. So those are the components that each one of them has, and they're different in all cases, but that's a fixture. Let's see where to go from here. Again, I'm sort of modifying what I had intended to do today, but let me show you that holy grail test that we were looking at before, which, you know, we've got a separate test written for all of our characters. Once we have a fixture in place, this can get really simple. So I'll start by saying, technically speaking, this is not really a test because it contains no assertions, but I'm not going to let that bother me. I'm using this to show you how to use a fixture. So my describe statement here, it plays the Bridge of Death scene from a fixture. And it'll do so by loading our characters from the fixture and looping through each one's experience. So I'll start my loop by telling Cypress to load the fixture called crew, and I'll stop there because you noticed it was crew.json, and you see that here I'm just telling it to load the fixture called crew. Did that on purpose. Cypress is really clever, and you can have JSON files, you can have CSV files, you can have there's something like 12 or 14 different file types that you can use as fixture formats for Cypress. And it's clever enough to know what it's opening, and therefore it can parse it and make that data available to you. And again, this is an example of Cypress taking some of the heavy lifting off of my shoulders, which I appreciate. So Cypress Fixture, I define a fixture of crew, and now I can iterate through each of its elements, and I'm going to call the element a character. So for each character, it performs the the stuff here in the middle. We visit the Bridge of Death scene page. We get the name input field and we type character.name. So that's pretty easy to follow. This is the first character, so character.name, that's going to be Sir Lancelot of Camelot, etc. It types in the quest, it types in the answer for question 3, and then it submits the form. That last thing is kind of fun. What you're looking at on line 18, Cypress can record screen recordings of your test. It can take screenshots at any point in the testing. So as you're developing, based on what you want to provide to your client, you can say, look, this is the user's experience, or watch this whole thing unfold for the user. So it provides some really powerful ways of documenting the results of your testing for your clients. So that's an example of how to use a fixture, and you can see that the test code itself got really simple. We were just able to write one loop and iterate through all of our different characters, as opposed to writing them all out, all those different character experiences separately. So let's see. So that's a bit about fixtures. Let's talk about custom commands. And this is where I think Cypress is particularly cool for Drupal, because we can do really Drupal-y things in fact, we can do very back-endy things through Cypress, which I think of as a front-end technology. And that's kind of amazing to me. And I hope that you share my enthusiasm before we're done here. So custom commands are defined in a particular file. It's in the support directory, and it's in a file called commands.js. That's where Cypress goes looking for your custom commands that you've defined. And then basically when you define a custom command, you build it on existing commands, and then once you've defined one, you call it just the way we saw, Cypress.visit or Cypress.get. It's cy.make-me-a-sandwich or whatever your command is, and that's how easily you can use those commands in your code. And then before too long, I want to show you how you can define drush as a custom command. And once you have drush, there's a whole lot you can do, as you know from your experience as a Drupal developer, if that's what you are. All right, time for another video that I know you're going to agree is worth it. At least I hope so. Okay, so context here is that it may feel like we are climbing a Cypress mountain, but what I'm hoping that you agree before too long, it's going to be really much more of a Cypress hill. All right. My speech coach told me it would be a good idea to include that. Okay, so let's see. There we go. We've got the screen back. Fantastic. All right, not Cypress Mountain. So let's look at some commands. Let's go find that command.js file that I was talking about just a second ago. It's in the support directory, and here is commands.js. I'll scroll up to the top, get rid of this thing. So let's start out with a really simple custom Cypress command. Here's how you define a Cypress command. It's cypress.commands.add. That's the basic introduction there. And then you say, what do you want the command to be called? That's the first thing you pass to the add method. And then you can define any parameters that your custom command is going to require. And then inside some curly brackets, you lay out what that custom command should do. Yeah, fire away.
So you have to have edit, I guess, before. So the ID would be name or pass, and then you have to have edit before that, or is the ID actually edit dash name?
Oh, so you're referring back to these tests, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when and in this test, when I said go find the edit dash name element, what I was talking about is if you look at this, here's the inspector for the form that we were testing, and if it's probably hard for you to read here, but this is an input element, and over here you see that its ID is edit dash name. So that's pretty standard output from a Drupal form of this kind. It's an input field and the ID is edit name. So when I said, Cypress, go get me the element with ID edit dash name, it grabs that particular input field. So in our custom commands here, if I want Cypress to be able to Drupal logout, what I mean by that is I want Cypress to visit the URL /user/logout, because in Drupal that will log out a user. So that's it's a one-line command. It's kind of like I'm trading a cypress.visit command for a cypress.drupal logout command, but it is a custom command. It's a super easy example. Here's a more complicated example. Login as. So again, Cypress commands.add. I want to call the command login as, and I'm going to tell Cypress that login as needs 2 parameters. I should probably stay here for audio purposes. So I need to pass it a username and a password. So what do I want that command to do? First thing I want that command to do is make sure that I'm unauthenticated to get started. because, you know, if you try to log in as one user when you are logged in as another, you get a 403. So first thing I do is I say, I've already defined Drupal logout. So Cypress Drupal logout. And then I want you to visit user login. And here's that, that get command again. And it's going to find the input field on the login form. And it'll type the username parameter that I'm going to pass to the login as command. Then I'm going to find the password field. I'm going to type the password, and I'm going to keep that out of my log. So Cypress keeps a log of tests and test results. And again, for information security purposes, you can keep some things out of the log. So that's just a cute little example of yet another way that Cypress has been thoughtful about information security. Here's another way of submitting a form. Before, we were typing curly brackets enter. This is just kind of a fun thing for me. You can also click on that. So again, very intuitive language. And this will log in a user with you know, given a username and password. Let's talk about how to define drush. I'm going to get into that in just a second, but when you execute drush commands, you need to be able to pass everything in the command line, right? It needs to be one big long string. You can't, you know, define an array and pass the array in to drush and so on. So I've got two, by the way, don't feel like you have to take really good notes here. You can have this code when you're done. There's a link that I'll share with you. But I just want to go through it here to show you what goes into building drush as a Cypress command. So we need to be able to take an object of arguments and basically stringify them, turn them into a string that is joined with spaces between the elements. And then there's another helper function that stringifies an array of, an object of options. And so both of these are going to be important when we want to execute drush commands. So I'm going to wave my hands at that a little bit and go back up to cypresscommands.add drush. So I want to call the command drush. That's easy for me because it'll keep my head clear as I'm writing my tests. And drush, my drush command in Cypress is going to take three different parameters. Which drush command do I want it to execute? So that's the first one, the command. So is it drush ULI? Is it drush CC all if you're doing Drupal 7, which I was earlier today, and so on. It'll pass you can pass an array of arguments or an object of options. And so, and again, this is a one-liner, but it's a heck of a one-liner. So there's a lot going on here. Let me just start by saying that what it does is it uses Cypress's execute command. So this is magical to me because Cypress is, in my opinion, is a front-end technology. And it is executing commands at the server level. It's like it's got a command line, and it's able to execute things in the command line. So that, to me, I don't want to just go past that without talking about how magical that is, because this is a technology that's equally comfortable on the front end and on the back end. So the first thing that we want it to do is execute what is the drush command in my current environment. So I've got an environment variable there. And here's one way to think about it. I'm doing my testing right now on a MacBook Pro. My client, and I'm running Lando as my local DevOps sort of solution. My client might be using DDev or some other, or it might just be running it natively. So in my environment, the way that I run a drush command from my terminal is Lando drush, whatever the thing is. So that's my drush command. And so what we do is we create an environment variable, and we define that in a file called cypress.env.json, and this declares my local environment variables. So in my local, drush command is the string lando drush. I've also got the base URL defined here, and that's kind of fun. So getting back to my custom commands, when I say Cypress execute whatever I've got stored locally as my drush command, Cypress is going to use lando drush here. Now, again, my client might just be drush based on their setup. So that's a little bit about environment variables that I snuck in under the radar there. And then it passes the value of the command that I'm using when I use drush. And then it stringifies my arguments and stringifies my options, and it passes the yes parameter argument to drush. So that's how you define drush. And I know it's complicated. I'm really happy that I can share this with you. What I'll tell you right now is that Joel Steidl gave me this code, saved me hours, so I didn't have to develop this. If I can save anybody else similar amount of time, it'll make me happy to be able to do so. So let's look at, let's look at our presentation and see where we are. Yep, we are, we're gonna look at another case study now. And it's a permissions-based case study. If you've been paying really close attention to the presentation this afternoon, you may have noticed the membership pitch block up here at the top of the page. And it says you should buy a membership because then you wouldn't have to see this block. So this sets us up for a good permissions-based test scenario. And the idea here is that only users that have the role member will not see that block. So in order to fully test that, we've got a few things that we need to do. So let's, here's that test. It's the pitch, the membership pitch. So we're gonna test the membership pitch block displaying only for non-members. Now there are different ways you can be a non-member. You can be unauthenticated. That means you're not authenticated as a member. You can be authenticated as a user without the member role. And then, of course, you can be, to be a member, you are authenticated and your user account has the member role. So let's just step through this test and look at a couple of things. First thing it does is it logs out of Drupal. So we execute my Drupal logout custom command that I shared with you a moment ago. The next thing we want to do is we want to test for the existence of the membership pitch block for unauthenticated users. We just logged out. We are unauthenticated right now. So the first thing it does is it visits our Bridge of Death page, and it goes and looks for this block, membership pitch block. And so if we look at the markup for this, it's really hard to see because it's really tiny, but there is the ID for the membership pitch block. So back in our test, it goes and it gets that by ID. And look, here's our assertion that should exist. So very intuitive language, really easy for me to understand as I'm looking through the logic of this Cypress test. And that's my assertion. So what I wish I could be showing you when the test runner is running, that'll get a little green check mark because as an unauthenticated user, it will see that membership pitch block. Indeed, we are unauthenticated right here. Then it creates a user without the member role, logs in as that user, and verifies that the block appears. So, I've got a, I want to show you this create user with role command because it's kind of cool. And we're about to use it, so let's look at it for a second. Cypresscommands.add, create user with role. It takes two parameters. One is the username, it's a string, and the next parameter is an array of roles, and that array can be empty. So the first thing it does, creating user with role, I want to make sure that that user doesn't exist right now. So first thing I want to do is I want to execute the drush user cancel command. And I pass along an array of parameters to that. So it's drush user cancel, delete all the content, and do it for the user with username. So that's the first thing I do is I cancel that account. That way I know that I can create that account and I won't get any errors out of Drupal saying that account already exists. So then we're going to execute the drush user create command. And I'm passing the username that I'd like to use for my new user. So that drush user create will return some output. And so I'm grabbing that output. The output I said, we grab the std error basically, which is the output of that drush user create command. And then we define a function that we can run on that std error. And one thing that we do is let's go from the output of creating that new user with drush, let's go find the UID. So we go for the first match against this created a new user with UID, then whatever the next thing is. We grab that, whatever the next thing is, that's our variable called UID. So then for each of the roles that we have passed in, we use drush user role add, and we give it the role, and then we give it the username. Here, this comment here is another sort of assertion that you could include, and you could say its output should include, that this success message basically. And then we log the message that we assigned the role. The one thing I want to show you here, and this is why I backtracked to show you this create user with role command, is that Cypress allows you to do something called wrapping. And when you wrap, you can take some output or some results of your current command and make it available to Cypress for whatever you want to do with it next. So we've already had the username. I probably didn't need to wrap the username, but I sure need to wrap the UID, because when we started this process, we didn't have the UID, and now we have it, and it's going to be useful. I'm going to wrap it for later. It's like a little doggy bag. So getting back to creating a user with a member role. So here's my username. I'm going to call it Cypress test user. I'm going to pass it an empty array of roles. Remember that I wrapped that UID. So I'm going to take its UID, the result of my Cypress create user with role command. I'm going to take its UID and then define this function that I operate on this UID. I want to log in user by UID, which is another custom command that I defined using drush ULI, and then visit the bridge of death page. And again, since this user does not have the member role, that block should exist. So there's my assertion on line 23. I do want to show you one cool thing in that custom command login user by UID. And that's this here. This is what I think is magical. So when we drush user login and we pass it the various things we need to pass it, when I type in a drush ULI in my terminal, there's a string that is the output in my terminal, and that's like the end of the road for me. Now I have to copy that string and go use it in a browser or something like that. Cypress can take that std out, that output, and then go and visit it in the browser. So here is a very back-endy thing happening. We're using a drush ULI command, very back-endy, and then without any interaction on our part, we're using it in the front end in the browser. So I think that's really cool, and I hope that you agree. So then, let's see. And then the last bit of this test, and I would love to show you this in the test runner. That'll be another time. We can test the same thing. We can create the user with role, and we can add the member role to our array of roles. And then when it logs in by user ID, visits the Bridge of Death page, then the membership pitch block should not exist. So again, another example of super intuitive language. And there's a lot that we did in this file that is very Drupal-y. If you're used to working in Drupal, this is, very much your home turf. And Cypress wasn't necessarily built for Drupal, but it's so extensible that it makes the kind of things that you and I might need to test for, makes it really easy to test for. Let's see. So with that concludes my prepared remarks. I do want to take some questions in just a moment. This is the, if you use this QR code, it'll go to Atten Design's website, and through that website you can download the repository that I've been using today for this presentation. So please feel free to do that. And come to happy hour. That's another thing that I'd like to mention, is that Atten is sponsoring happy hour afterwards at, where is it, Joe? It's yeah, it's right by the baseball field. So all the relevant details are here, buried in this QR code's result. And now I'm open to taking any questions if anybody has any questions.
There were a couple questions from Hopin.
Yeah.
So first one, what is the commercial and/or open source status of Cypress?
What's the commercial and open source status? I don't really know what the commercial status is. I would assume that is asking about the financial strength of the organization or something like that. I don't know. But it's open source from in philosophy and all along, and I don't anticipate that would change. I think that's one of the open source, in my experience, tends to stay open source. I wish I had a more comprehensive answer than
I
that.
think they have a paid service as well.
Oh, I imagine that they do. I haven't used it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can use it without paying them for it?
Yes. Although your test runner might not.
What about using it in like a CI environment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are and I haven't done that personally, but yes, you can integrate Cypress testing into your continuous integration. That was the question here: is can you use Cypress as part of continuous integration? And yes, you can.
And then the other question from Hopin, can you compare it a bit to Nightwatch or other scriptable GUI test tools?
I can't, because I'm not familiar with them.
Okay.
Does anybody in the room have experience with those other technologies? A little bit?
I have a little bit of experience. I know the Drupal core uses Nightwatch, and I've written a Nightwatch tester too.
Uh-huh.
I heard a comment at another DrupalCamp that that there was a close decision between Nightwatch and Cypress, and the person who was talking to me thinks they made the wrong decision.
Oh, going with Nightwatch. So I don't know if people remotely heard that, but Drupal core uses Nightwatch, and there's been some speculation that they should have used Cypress instead of Nightwatch. Thank you very much for that.
And what do you know about Behat and Selenium as a comparison?
Not really. No, I don't. I wish I could speak to that with more direct experience.
And then one other question I had was if the test runner can be like command line only, or if it has to run a browser, but you have to watch it.
That's a great question. Yeah, so thanks very much, Ty. So the question in the room was, can you run your Cypress tests purely in the command line and not use the GUI test runner? And there's an answer in the room. So,
We use a headless browser.
okay. So,
it runs,
For Cypress.
yeah, with Cypress. So it just runs, like, it just runs in the cloud.
terrific. So the answer is that this participant uses a headless implementation of Cypress. So there's no browser involved. It just runs in the cloud. Thank you.